Welcome to today's episode where we'll be exploring Ryan Holiday's profound work, Ego is the Enemy. If you've ever wondered why talented people sometimes fail inexplicably, why success often leads to downfall, or why some individuals seem to grow stronger through adversity while others crumble, this book offers compelling insights that might just change how you view yourself and your ambitions. Introduction. The Ego's Deceptive Whisper. Let's begin with a question. What stands between you and the things you want to accomplish in life? Is it lack of talent? Insufficient resources? Bad luck? While these factors certainly play a role, Ryan Holiday makes a provocative case that our greatest obstacle is often something far more insidious: our own ego. But what exactly does Holiday mean by ego? He's not using the term in the strict Freudian sense of a mediator between our primal desires and social constraints. Rather, he defines ego as an unhealthy belief in our own importance, our arrogance and self-centered ambition, the need to be better than, more than, recognized for, far past any reasonable utility. It's that voice that tells us we're special, that our story is so compelling and unique that we deserve success without the requisite work. The genius of Holiday's approach is how he frames ego not as an abstract philosophical concept, but as a practical obstacle to achievement. Throughout the book, he draws from both historical examples and contemporary cases to illustrate how ego manifests at different stages of our journey, when we aspire to something, when we achieve success, and when we experience failure. What makes these lessons particularly powerful is Holiday's own background. As a marketing strategist who achieved remarkable success at a young age, becoming the director of marketing for American Apparel at just 21. Holiday speaks not as a detached theorist, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand the corrosive effects of ego in high-pressure environments and within himself. But before we dive deeper into Holiday's framework, let's clarify something important. This isn't a book about eliminating ambition or desire for achievement. Holiday isn't advocating for some monastic rejection of worldly success. Instead, he's making a crucial distinction between ego and confidence, between grandiose self-absorption and quiet competence. As he puts it, confidence is earned through hard work and honest self-assessment. Ego is stolen through delusion and self-deception. With that clarification in mind, let's explore the three main parts of the book, which correspond to the three main challenges we face in life: aspiration, success, and failure. Part 1. Aspiration, the dangerous beginnings. When we're starting out on any endeavor, whether launching a business, learning a new skill, or pursuing a creative project, we're particularly vulnerable to ego's influence. Why? Because at this stage, we have nothing concrete to point to, no tangible achievements or recognition. All we have is potential and aspiration. This creates what psychologists call a status deficit, a gap between how we see ourselves and how the world sees us. And ego loves to fill this gap with fantasies and posturing rather than actual work. Holiday identifies several manifestations of ego during the aspiration phase: talk versus work. Perhaps the most common ego trap at the beginning of any journey is what Holiday calls talking instead of doing. We've all encountered, or perhaps been, people who talk endlessly about the book they're going to write, the business they're going to start, or the transformation they're going to undergo, without ever taking substantial action. Holiday references research showing that talking about our goals can actually decrease our motivation to achieve them. When we talk about our plans, we receive a premature sense of completeness, a hit of dopamine that simulates the feeling of actual achievement. This creates what psychologists call social reality, where talking about something makes us feel like we've already done it. I can't help but think about all those announcement posts we see on social media, where people proudly declare they're starting a podcast, writing a novel, or launching a business, only to have the project quietly fade away months later. The ego gets its satisfaction from the announcement, not the achievement. The passion delusion. Another ego trap. Holiday identifies as the modern obsession with passion. While genuine passion can certainly fuel persistence through difficulties, what often masquerades as passion is actually ego in disguise, a desire for attention, status, or validation, rather than love for the work itself. Holiday gives the example of a young writer who approaches a successful author at a conference, explaining that he wants to be a writer because he has a lot to say. The established author responds, "Everyone has something to say. What matters is how you say it." The aspiring writer, focused more on being heard than on mastering his craft, misses the point entirely. This reminds me of a conversation I once had with a friend who wanted to start a YouTube channel. When I asked what specific value he wanted to provide for his audience, he seemed confused. "I just think people would find my life interesting," he said. 6 months and 8 videos later, the channel was abandoned. Without a genuine interest in serving an audience, rather than being admired by one, his passion quickly fizzled when fame didn't immediately materialize. The danger of early pride. Perhaps the most subtle ego trap during aspiration is what Holiday calls being too proud to learn. When we believe we already know enough, or that conventional wisdom doesn't apply to us because we're somehow exceptional, we close ourselves off from the very knowledge that might help us succeed. Holiday contrasts 2 approaches to learning: becoming a student, humble, receptive, willing to start at the beginning, versus becoming a self-proclaimed expert, arrogant, closed, unwilling to admit ignorance. The former leads to genuine growth, the latter to stagnation disguised as superiority. He shares the fascinating example of Kirk Hammett, lead guitarist of Metallica, who despite already being in a successful band, sought out guitar lessons from Joe Satriani. Hammett recognized that despite his achievements, he still had much to learn. This humility, this willingness to be a perpetual student, has kept Metallica innovative and relevant for decades. The antidote: purpose and discipline. So what's the alternative to these ego traps? Holiday suggests replacing self-absorption with purpose and discipline. When we focus on what we can contribute rather than what we can gain, when we orient ourselves towards service rather than self-aggrandizement, we naturally bypass many of ego's snares. He cites the example of Katharine Graham, who took over the Washington Post after her husband's suicide, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. Despite her insecurities, she focused relentlessly on serving the paper's mission, eventually transforming it into one of the most respected publications in the world and making herself, almost incidentally, the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company. The lesson? Purpose transcends ego. When we're driven by something larger than ourselves, a cause, a craft, a contribution to others, we're less likely to be derailed by the ego's constant demands for validation and recognition. Part 2. Success: the perils of achievement. If ego poses challenges during aspiration, it becomes even more dangerous once we achieve some measure of success. As Holiday puts it, while the rise can be thrilling, the fall from the height of success can be equally devastating. This is why we often see talented individuals or promising organizations suddenly implode after a period of achievement. The very success they work so hard to attain becomes the seed of their undoing, not because success itself is problematic, but because of how success interacts with ego. The disease of me. Holiday references legendary basketball coach Pat Riley's concept of the disease of me, the tendency for previously cohesive teams to disintegrate after achieving success because individual players begin to crave more credit, more playing time, more money, and more recognition. We see this pattern repeatedly in various domains. Bands break up at the height of their popularity. Successful companies grow complacent and miss market shifts. Politicians who rose to power as reformers become corrupted by the very system they sought to change. The ego, fed by external validation, grows increasingly hungry. What once satisfied it no longer does. The acclaim that once seemed unimaginable now feels insufficient. I'm reminded of a tech entrepreneur I once interviewed who had sold his first company for a modest but life-changing sum. I thought that would be enough, he told me. But within months, I was obsessively tracking the success of my peers whose exits were bigger than mine. My actual achievement meant nothing compared to what I thought I deserved. The narrative fallacy. Another danger of success that Holiday identifies is what he calls the narrative fallacy, our tendency to create simplistic, self-serving stories about how we achieved success, often minimizing the role of luck, privilege, timing, and the contributions of others. These narratives aren't just inaccurate, they're dangerous because they lead us to misunderstand the actual causes of our success and therefore make poor decisions moving forward. If we attribute our success entirely to our brilliant strategy, rather than acknowledging the favorable market conditions that made it possible, we're likely to stick with that strategy even when conditions change, often with disastrous results. Consider how many business books profile successful companies, extracting seemingly universal principles from their rise, only for those same companies to falter dramatically just after publication. The popular press lauded Enron's innovative business model right up until its catastrophic fraud was exposed. Nokia was celebrated for its market dominance shortly before being rendered nearly obsolete by the smartphone revolution. These cautionary tales reveal how ego-driven narratives about success can blind us to changing realities and emerging threats. The entitlement complex. Perhaps the most visible manifestation of ego after success is entitlement. The belief that we deserve special treatment, that rules that apply to others don't apply to us, that we've made it, and therefore no longer need to maintain the disciplines and practices that got us there. Holiday shares the example of Napoleon, whose early military career was marked by strategic brilliance and careful planning. Yet as his success and power grew, so did his sense of invincibility. The meticulous general who once accounted for every contingency began to believe in his own myth of inevitability, a delusion that eventually led to his disastrous Russian campaign and ultimate downfall. We see similar patterns today. Celebrities who begin to believe they're above the law, executives who think ethical boundaries don't apply to them, creative professionals who become so convinced of their genius that they stop putting in the work required for continued excellence. The antidote: sobriety, systems, and service. What protects us from these ego traps? Holiday suggests 3 key practices. First, sobriety, not just literal sobriety, though that helps, but a commitment to seeing reality clearly rather than through the distorted lens of ego. This means actively seeking out feedback and criticism, especially when successful, precisely because success tends to insulate us from honest assessment. Second, systems. Establishing practices and procedures that don't depend on our momentary inspiration or discipline. These might include morning routines, regular reflection practices, or accountability structures that keep us grounded regardless of external circumstances. Third, service. Continually redirecting our focus toward contribution rather than accumulation. Holiday references the ancient tradition of the memento mori, reminders of mortality that many successful individuals throughout history have used to maintain perspective. When we remember that our time is limited, we naturally prioritize meaningful impact over ego gratification. I particularly appreciate how Holiday challenges the common narrative that humility is only necessary on the way up, and that successful people have earned the right to self-importance. He argues convincingly that humility is even more crucial after achievement than before it. Part 3. Failure, the crucible of character. The final section of the book addresses perhaps the most challenging phase of any journey: failure. Whether through our own mistakes, others' actions, or simple bad luck, we will inevitably experience setbacks, defeats, and disappointments. How we respond to these moments reveals and shapes our character far more than how we handle success. The ego's destructive responses. Holiday identifies several ego-driven reactions to failure, all of which compound the original problem rather than resolving it. First, denial, the refusal to acknowledge reality. When our self-image is too wrapped up in being right or successful, we may reject clear evidence of failure rather than learn from it. Think of executives who blame temporary market conditions for systematic problems, or politicians who dismiss declining poll numbers as fake news. Second, externalization, blaming others for our problems. While external factors certainly contribute to failure, the ego seeks to place responsibility entirely outside ourselves, thus protecting our self-image but preventing growth. Third, anger, channeling the pain of failure into aggression toward others or ourselves. While temporarily satisfying, this response diverts energy from the actual work of recovery and improvement. Fourth, depression, collapsing into helplessness when our ego-constructed identity is threatened by failure. If we've defined ourselves entirely by achievement, failure doesn't just mean we've experienced a setback. It means we are a failure, a devastating conclusion that paralyzes further action. The depths of adversity. Holiday draws powerfully from Stoic philosophy in this section, particularly the concept of amor fati, love of fate, or the capacity to embrace rather than merely accept what happens to us, including painful experiences. He shares several profound examples of individuals who transformed devastating failures into sources of growth. Thomas Edison framing the destruction of his laboratory by fire as an opportunity to start anew. Ulysses S. Grant finding his true purpose as a military leader only after multiple career failures. Walt Disney using bankruptcy as a catalyst for innovation. What distinguishes these responses from ego-driven reactions is the willingness to fully experience failure without allowing it to define one's identity or worth. I'm reminded of research on the fixed mindset versus growth mindset identified by psychologist Carol Dweck. Those with a fixed mindset, which closely aligns with Holiday's concept of ego, see failure as evidence of inherent deficiency and therefore something to be avoided or denied. Those with a growth mindset view failure as information, painful but valuable feedback that facilitates learning and development. The antidote: persistence and perspective. How do we cultivate this healthier relationship with failure? Holiday suggests two key approaches. First, persistence, the determination to continue despite setbacks. Not the ego-driven persistence that stubbornly repeats the same mistakes, but the humble persistence that adapts based on feedback while maintaining commitment to core principles and values. Second, perspective, the ability to see our failures within a larger context. Holiday references Marcus Aurelius's cosmic perspective, the practice of zooming out to view our personal setbacks against the backdrop of history and the universe, not to minimize their importance, but to right-size their impact on our sense of self. One of my favorite passages from the book comes when Holiday discusses what he calls the gift of being nobody, the freedom that comes from releasing the burden of expectation and self-importance. When we're not desperately trying to prove our significance, we can actually focus on doing significant work. Practical applications. Ego management for everyday life. Having explored the three main sections of the book, let's consider how Holiday's insights might apply to common challenges we all face: social media and modern ego inflation. While Holiday's examples span history from ancient Rome to the present day, his message seems particularly relevant in our social media age, where tools for ego gratification are literally at our fingertips 24/7. The ability to curate a perfect-looking life online, to receive instant validation through likes and comments, to compare ourselves constantly to others' highlight reels. All these modern realities supercharge ego's natural tendencies. I can't help thinking about research showing that many people would rather receive an electric shock than sit alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. Our discomfort with simply being, without performing, achieving, or being recognized, speaks to how deeply ego drives our behavior. Holiday might suggest that practices like digital detoxes, meditation, and deliberately seeking anonymity in certain areas of life provide necessary counterbalances to these ego-inflating forces. The hard work of accurate self-assessment. Another practical challenge is developing what Holiday calls the ability to evaluate one's own abilities, to see ourselves accurately, neither inflating our strengths out of ego, nor diminishing them out of false modesty. This reminds me of the Dunning-Kruger effect, the cognitive bias that leads incompetent people to overestimate their competence, because they lack the knowledge to recognize their limitations, while causing highly competent people to underestimate their abilities, because they are aware of how much they don't know. Holiday suggests that accurate self-assessment comes not from introspection alone, but from action followed by honest evaluation of results. Rather than asking, "Am I good enough?" an ego-driven question, we might ask, "Did this specific work achieve its intended effect?" This shifts focus from identity to outcomes, from self-worth to effectiveness. Balancing confidence and humility. Perhaps the most nuanced challenge is finding what Holiday calls confident humility, the sweet spot between self-doubt and self-aggrandizement. This isn't about splitting the difference between extremes, but about transcending the ego's false dichotomy altogether. True confidence, Holiday suggests, comes from demonstrated competence and clear-eyed self-knowledge, not from positive self-talk or inflated self-image. True humility stems not from self-deprecation, but from recognizing our place within a larger whole and our dependence on factors beyond our control. When we embrace both our genuine capabilities and our inherent limitations, we access a kind of quiet strength that ego, for all its bluster, can never provide. Conclusion: the ongoing battle. As we conclude our exploration of ego is the enemy, it's important to recognize that Holiday offers no permanent solution to ego. No silver bullet that eliminates its influence once and for all. Rather, he presents ego management as an ongoing practice, a muscle that strengthens with use, but atrophies with neglect. The book's title itself contains this truth. Ego is the enemy. Present tense, not was or can be, but is. A persistent force that requires continuous vigilance and adjustment. This framing might seem discouraging at first. After all, who wants another never-ending responsibility? But I find it oddly comforting. The goal isn't perfection, some ego-free state of enlightenment, but progress, becoming incrementally more aware of ego's whispers and incrementally more skilled at choosing alternative responses. This perspective allows for self-compassion when we inevitably get caught in ego's traps, as we all do, while maintaining healthy aspiration toward improvement. It's not about eradicating ego, but about preventing it from hijacking our lives and work. Holiday concludes with this powerful thought. The only real failure is abandoning your principles. Not failure to achieve external markers of success, not failure to receive recognition, not even failure to reach your goals, but failure to remain true to your values and purpose. In this way, the battle against ego isn't just about becoming more successful, though it often leads there. It's about becoming more whole, more capable of contributing meaningfully to the world, while experiencing genuine satisfaction in the process. And isn't that, stripped of ego's distortions, what we're really after? Thank you for joining me for this exploration of Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy. Until next time, may you pursue your goals with purpose rather than pride, achieve success with sobriety rather than self-importance, and face failure with persistence rather than paralysis. After all, as Holiday reminds us, the path of least resistance is a terrible teacher. The challenges we face, including the challenge of ego itself, are not obstacles to our development, but opportunities for it. Here's to taking the ego-challenging path of greater resistance and finding our true strength along the way.